be a good person and be a great person and contribute and do greater things and help change the world, to actually manifest heaven on earth, which I believe is the real test. Not to wait to die so that you can live. The test is, can you get this right here? And let's see if y'all could come together and fix this and make it a heaven right now. And if you can't, then maybe you guys get another chance. But I think that's what it's really all about. And this notion that, you know, if you don't repent and call on the name of Jesus, then you can't make it into heaven, and you're going to be damned into hell for the rest of your life or all eternity. To me, just is illogical, because if I'm a person that's a great human being that has never seen or heard anything about this.
Jesus said there was a rich man who was dressed in purple and fine linen and lived in luxury every day. At his gate was laid a beggar named Lazarus, covered with sores and longing to eat what fell from the rich man's table. Even the dogs came and licked his sores. The time came when the beggar died, and the angels carried him to Abraham's side. The rich man also died and was buried.
Hey everyone, I'm Billy Carson, aka Forbidden Knowledge, and I have my very good friend, Paul Anthony Wallis. He's a best-selling author, he's a former archdeacon in the church, and he's an amazing human being. And he's also, for me, one of my mentors. And so I'm welcoming you guys back to episode 2 of Bible Study with Billy Carson and Paul Anthony Wallis. Welcome back, Paul.
G'day, Billy. It's great to be with you again.
Thank you, man. Yeah, this is great. It's long overdue. Actually, the first time we did this, a lot of people in the comments were very pleased with your teaching style and technique and the information that we provided, and had requested that we come back and do another one. And so now here we are. We finally are back together to do another amazing Bible study.
Yes, by popular demand. That's great to hear.
Yeah. Absolutely. So I'll kind of let you lead off where you want this to go. And, I'm pretty confident this is going to be one for the ages. I feel like this is going to be one that really gives people some deep insight and give them some perspective on life themselves, and also even the universe and Jesus as a whole.
What do you believe, Billy, about the human condition? Do you believe in life before life? Were we something else before we became this? And what do you think happens when this mortal coil gets shuffled off?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's such a deep question. A lot of people ask that question to themselves and even to the universe or to God or to their pastors or their friends and family. Everyone wants to know that answer. It's a deep, deep answer. And it's really, I think, going to be based a lot on a person's belief system, their perspective, things that they've researched. In my particular case, it's based on my research into ancient civilizations, ancient texts, tablets, scriptures, papyruses, things that I've come across over time. I've sat with bushmen, I've sat with chiefs and sages. I've sat with pyramid priests. And so I'm always inquiring to gain knowledge and wisdom from them, as well as what's in these texts. And then my study in science has also taken me to another level where I can now paint a picture for myself, at least. And so what I believe is that there is life before life, and that this universe is a creation, that the Bible is right, that we are living in a creation, that the indigenous ancient peoples were all right. We are living in a creation. I believe that we're living inside of something called a fractal holographic universe, which is a matrix made of light. And that this creation is running on a specific type of divine code. And this code can be found in something called the Adinkra codes, which were discovered by Professor James Gates Jr. at the University of Maryland. Him and a team of mathematicians cracked a code on the universe and discovered these Adinkra codes. And these codes are similar to the Adinkra symbols of the Dogon tribe in Mali, Africa. Except when you take these symbols and turn them into three-dimensional structures, there's hidden codes inside called error-correcting codes. And when they analyzed these codes, they discovered that these were the same exact codes that run search engines and web browsers. So they discovered that the fabric of space-time itself is running on a code that is similar to the same code we use to make websites and search engines. And then you go a step further with the Mandelbrot set equation by Benoit Mandelbrot, which was first used by Pixar Studios in their animation software to create every scene on the fly. See, Benoit Mandelbrot realized that the universe was also fractal. You can see in the smallest piece. And he realized that this fractal matrix was being created on the fly, that the mountains and the ranges and the hurricanes and the tornadoes and the universe and the galaxy, everything within is all fractalized, as above, so below. And this very simple small code can be implemented and create entire universes, entire planets, entire civilizations from one small code. And then you add then the other part of it in with the Fibonacci sequence, the golden ratio, the golden triangle, and pi and phi. All of a sudden, we're putting together a crime scene of the creation. We're putting together a scene that's saying these things together are giving us clues and tips on the programmer itself. Now, who that exact program is, we call it God. Most people say God. That's the typical name that we give the creator, right? And there's nothing wrong with that. I feel there is a God. I feel that there is a creator because of this circumstantial evidence that's been laid around. And because of the circumstantial evidence that proves that this is a creation, that means there was something before the creation because somebody had to create this. This is a realm that we're inhabiting, but could be one of many, many, many realms. And when you begin to understand and look at base reality and our potential to be in base reality or the first reality or the first plane of reality, it seems as if it's not for us. It seems as if we're very, very far away from base reality and that we could be one of Google's of potential universes that actually exist in a sea of universes, in a multiverse. And that there is a life before life. There's a life even before the multiverse. And that in that realm, which is above these dimensions, there is a creator or creators that have gone about the business of creating these simulations, kind of like the Matrix movie. And what is our purpose here? Our purpose, from my personal opinion, again, on my research, is that we're here to collect data and information. We're here to transmit that back to the source so that the source can say, oh, this is what it's like to be Billy Carson in this situation. This is what it's like to be Paul Anthony Wallis in Australia walking along a shoreline or whatever it is. This is what it's like to be a rock or a blade of grass, or even what it's like to be an atom inside of a cell phone. So it's this experiential mode that's here in the third dimension that's transmitting, in my opinion, information back to the source through quantum entanglement. And the source, which is God, is now understanding every aspect of every dimension within this universe and maybe even the multiverse. So there is a life before life, and I believe that we are a part of that initial original life because I believe there's only one consciousness and we are part of it, that we are just been given the illusion of individuality, the illusion of separation, so that we can live our lives, but we're just a point dot frequency number off from the main source frequency to give us this slight bit of an illusion of separation and individuality, but it really is just all of us. We're all one. So the universe has made itself subjective to us so we can go out and collect information and data and bring it back to it, just like our brain does inside of our skull. It doesn't know what's going on. It collects information. It sends to its sensory perception, go out there and collect the data. The hands go out, the smelling, the eyes, the taste, the touch, the hearing go out, collect information, bring it back to the brain. And then the brain sorts everything out and projects a hologram, and we navigate this universe based on that holographic projection from sensory perception collected data. For the universe, we are the sensory perception friends. We go out and collect information and we transmit it back to the source. So in terms of what happens after, I do believe that these corporeal bodies are temporal, that they only, of course, they're made to last for a small amount of time, and that the spirit that's inhabiting these bodies is going to be released back into the universe, back into a higher dimension, back into our higher selves, wherever that location is outside of these planes of existence. I believe that, like the ancients say, when you die, you wake up, and
Yes.
and you reconnect to your true self. That this whole world, as the Australian Aboriginals call it, is dream time, and in the Americas, the indigenous natives call it. I'm saying they call it sleepy time in Australia and dream time in America, and the indigenous Americas. And I do believe that we are somehow, they're true, that we somehow wake up to our true selves and our true connection to source. And then we realize that we all are all just part of one thing, one grand design. And to me, it's incredible, because it's incredible to feel like you can be a part of everything, but also have the illusion of some individuality at the same time.
Yes. Wow. Billy, we've gone right into the deep end with your answer there. And if anyone is listening who's never met you before, they would know straight away now that you are deeply into Hermeticism, because so much of what you said there was Hermetic wisdom. Yeah. Anyone familiar with Buddhism would have heard notes of that in your answer as well. I find it fascinating that you've reached these conclusions through your interest in ancient wisdom like Hermeticism, but also through contemporary science, fractal science, for instance. The idea that we are living in a reality that's been generated as a holographic reality, a fractalization of light, that's actually a very ancient idea. So in the 1200s, Robert Grosseteste, he was a Christian bishop, and he came to that conclusion that we would never understand this reality until we understood the properties of light, because he believed everything was built on light and constructed with light. And what's so interesting about that is that he came to that conclusion from his start point as a Bible translator, and yet he reached that way of thinking. And of course, it's there in Buddhism as well, the idea that this familiar life of the senses is actually an illusion, and that physical reality is an illusion, and that we are primarily beings of consciousness having a temporary material experience that may be one of a number. Well, that's deeply embedded in Buddhism. I didn't know any of this for a long, long time, because I was deep in the world of evangelical Christianity, and I thought those ideas were really contrary to Christianity, so I didn't give them much attention. And it was only much later when I started reading people like Giordano Bruno, who was a great intellect of the 16th century, who toured the world giving lectures about how we can extend our cognitive powers. He also gave lectures about the nature of the cosmos. He was an early adopter in the Copernican revolution, and he understood, just as you said earlier, that we are in a universe that is full of life, and that the life on this planet is similar to life elsewhere in the cosmos. There may, he said, be beings even more advanced than ourselves in other parts of the cosmos. And for his contribution, of course, the Roman Catholic Church burned him to death, because they just weren't ready for that message, unfortunately. I have come to very similar conclusions by a different path, because, as I say, I spent a long time in the world of evangelical Christianity. I began my life as an atheist, and then I became a Christian through a combination of reading Jesus in the Gospels and deciding he was a figure I should take seriously. And then I had a powerful spiritual experience just before I turned 17 in a Christian church. And so that was the path I followed into the world of ministry for 33 years. But only latterly have I realized the breadth of the Christian tradition. In the beginning, I was always very appreciative of the fact that there were evangelicals and Protestants and Catholics and Eastern Orthodox. I've always been interested in exploring that full breadth. But when we go back to the beginning of Christianity, that's when I discovered that everything you've just said would have been seen as a very welcome part of the Christian conversation. And there were significant church fathers right at the beginning who said, as you did, Billy, I think we had a life before this material one. And then we will go on to something else, could be another time around here, or onto something unimaginably different. And that doesn't sound like modern Christianity. But if you go to Origen, the pioneer of Christian hermeneutics, that's what he believed. And if you go to Clement of Alexandria, the father of the Alexandrian school of hermeneutics, that's what he believed. And they got it from Plato. And as I've rediscovered Plato through the church fathers, I have become persuaded of the same things that you've just described, that we are primarily beings of consciousness, that we had an existence before incarnating as material beings, that we are here, as you said, to have experiences, to learn things, and contribute to the great experiment of the cosmos, to contribute to the learning of the cosmos. So this was Plato's point of view, that the material cosmos is, in essence, a fractalization of consciousness, that before the material universe existed, there was, to use our language, a unified field of consciousness, and that to experience itself, it expressed itself in materiality. And we are all aspects of that story. And so we begin as aspects of the source, and then we individuate, then we have this material experience, we learn things, and then we go on to something else. And I've discovered that is not in any way hostile to the beliefs of the first Christians. So if I ask, how does that relate to the Bible? There was a verse years ago I would always quote, sort of against the Buddhist view and against the Platonic view. But as I've got deeper into Bible translation, into the root meanings of the key words, I found another message hidden in plain sight, and it is that Platonic Greek view. Oh, and just to mention on the fractalization point, there's a lovely definition of God that the Apostle Paul gives in Acts 17. And he's speaking to a non-Christian audience, a non-Jewish audience, so he has to unpack his terms. And he uses the Greek word theos. And he says, by theos, I mean the source of the cosmos and everything in it, that in which we all live and move and have our being, of which we are all offspring, as one of your own poets has said. And what I love about that is there's no separation in that vision. We couldn't be more intimately connected with the source and with each other. We're all emanations of the source. We're all expressions of the source. And I think it's a very beautiful way to look at the world, to look at other people, and to understand ourselves, that we should fully expect to be thinking divine thoughts, having divine experiences, because we're all emanations of that source. But this verse, I'm going to mention this verse because Christians often use this to preach against the view that we've just outlined. And it comes in Hebrews 9:27. But I'm just going to go at it word by word, really look at the basic meanings of these words. And it says this, Hebrews 9:27, it's usually translated, and just as it is appointed to man to die once and afterwards face judgment. So that sounds like the classic Orthodox Christian view. You get one chance, one life, and then you're going to be judged. And of course, when we hear the word judgment, we think, oh no, that means consigned to heaven or hell, doesn't it? But let's go to the actual words. Something else emerges. So here they are. And in as much as it is appointed to the man, once having died, then after this, evaluation. That's what the words actually mean. Judgment doesn't necessarily mean consigned to heaven or hell. The word just means here's the moment when you get evaluated. And if I read those words again, it's actually the same view that Plato taught. And in as much as it is apportioned to the man, once having died, then after this evaluation, that's exactly what he said would happen. He believed that we live this life, we have these learning opportunities, and that when we die, guides come alongside us and say, Paul, you're done. How do you feel that went? And we do our debriefing. We have our evaluation. And Plato says if we haven't learned to shake off the heavier emotions, by which he meant things like rage, resentment, trauma, anxiety, fear, unfulfilled ambition, unforgiveness, those things, he said, can hold us too tightly to this life. And we might feel at that point, oh, I didn't get it. I didn't nail it. I didn't learn it this time round. And then we have the option, well, do you want to go again? Do you want to have another go? And Plato offered this sort of tentatively, and it was also tentatively believed by Origen and Clement of Alexandria. And it's that kind of life review is the word we would use today, that verse says we have to look forward to. And yet, for 2,000 years, we've read something else into that verse. You only get this opportunity, and then you'll be judged, and it'll be heaven or hell for eternity. So my view has really evolved to take on the Platonic view, which was foundational to the original Christianity, and to realize actually not only is it there in the Church Fathers, it's there in the New Testament when you peel back the layers of interpretation that we've all got used to. And there's another, I want to do that with another text, which again,
it's incredible.
As a Christian, I often used to say, no, this is the thing. And what Christianity says is totally different to Greek thought or pagan thought or Muslim thought or Baptist thought. And my understanding was we have this physical body, we live this life, and then when we die, our bodies will be sort of reanimated and transformed in a way that they're now indestructible. And then we go on forever like that. And often I would go to 1 Corinthians 15 to prove that that's what the New Testament was on about. But once again, as I've got deeper into Bible translation, I've realized that's actually not what the text says. And the text is much, much closer to that Greek view, that Platonic view than I'd thought. And we shouldn't be surprised because the New Testament and Gospels were written by Greek writers for Greek readers in a world dominated by Greek thought, which had been enriched by Eastern thought. It was all enmeshed with what became Hermetic thought. So we shouldn't be surprised to see these connections. So the text I'll go to now, 1 Corinthians 15, and a section that talks about the resurrection body. Bear in mind, he's talking about Jesus's resurrection and yours and mine. And this is how the Apostle Paul describes it. This is what he thinks he's going on. So Paul says, but someone will ask, how are the dead raised? With what kind of body will they come? What a foolish question, he says. What you sow does not come to life unless it dies. When you sow, you do not plant the body that will be, but just a seed, perhaps of wheat or of something else. But God gives it a body as he has determined, and to each kind of seed, he gives its own body. Not all flesh is the same. People have one kind of flesh, animals have another, birds another, and fish another. There are also heavenly beings, and there are earthly beings. But the splendor of the heavenly is one kind, and the splendor of the earthly is another. Can you see where he's going? He's separating the idea of a material existence from a heavenly existence. Here's where he goes. He says the sun has one kind of splendor, the moon another, and the stars another. And star differs from star in splendor. So it will be with the resurrection of the dead. It's going to be completely different. The body that is sown is perishable. So he's talking about our material bodies. He's saying they're going to die. They're going to decompose. It is raised imperishable. It is raised eternal. It is sown in dishonor. It is raised in glory. It is sown in weakness. It is raised in power. It is sown a natural body. what is raised is a spiritual body.
Hmm.
So he's contrasting material life with spiritual life, material existence, spiritual existence. And they are completely different kinds of existence, he's saying. And the body, just like the seed, is sown into the ground and it dies and perishes and decomposes. We go on as something spiritual. Now, what he's saying there is just the same as Plato would say, that we are primarily beings of consciousness. We have a material episode, and then we continue as beings of consciousness. Paul doesn't get into the life before life, although Origen questions that and suggests that might be a possibility too. But he does have this idea that we are essentially what he would call spiritual entities or beings of consciousness, and that we go on after in that way. And I find that echoed also in the Gospel of John. When John introduces Jesus to us, he says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. Then the Word became flesh, became material, and dwelt among us. And then later in the Gospel, we hear Jesus praying, and he says to God, he says, Father, I'm now about to return to you, back to the glory we enjoyed before the foundation of the world. And that story arc, existing before as an aspect of God, having this material life, and then going back to source, what the Gnostics called the great repose. In Greek thought, that's the story of all of us. And that's the story mapped out for Jesus in the Gospel of John. So that's the view I've come to, that Jesus in that prologue of John is modeling what's true of all of us. A pre-existence as an aspect of cosmic consciousness, and then a material individual. And then I'm going to go on to something unimaginably different, unless I say, I didn't nail it. I think I'm going to go around again.
Yeah. That's amazing. It's to me, it's amazing. It's inspiring. It takes away the fear. I recently had a near-death experience back in September of 2024. And it was a life-changing experience to be able to go through that and to see that the transition from this reality to the next was instantaneous. There wasn't like this gradual progression into it. It was, I was here and then I was there, and there was no pain. My eyes were clear. I can breathe. I had pneumonia, but I can breathe all of a sudden. I was perfectly fine. I had the illusion that I was breathing. And it was just beautiful and glorious. And that experience took away all my fear, because I realized that, yes, there is a life after life, and that you're going to be just fine.
Yes, I agree. I think Plato's view does take away a lot of fear, because if our purpose here is to learn things, essentially to learn love, to learn how to vibrate at a higher frequency, to learn love, joy, compassion, harmony. If our purpose is to learn that and to have experiences, then let's do that. You can go at life with curiosity and with courage. But if you're tiptoeing around thinking this is my only chance to get it right, and after that, the judgment, well, you just extracted all the joy from the process that you possibly could. And I think this has come through a mistranslation of other texts, through manipulations by religion, which want people frightened of separation from God. They want people frightened of hell. And in my book, The Eden Conspiracy, I show that the doctrine of hell is not rooted in the Gospels and New Testament at all. It has to be read in. Once you've dismantled that, you're in a place where you can go at life with so much more courage.
Yeah.
If life is a sequence of experiences, then let's have them. And so I find it really empowering, getting back to, well, what did Christians believe in the beginning, and realize this was all part of the conversation.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's phenomenal, really. I think a lot of people have been living this life of fear. It's one of the things I hear the most when people come up to me and tell me that, my entire life I've been living in this fear of this damnation and this hell, this burning fire, and and that they wouldn't be worthy enough to avoid that situation. And I just
Yeah.
tell them, like, if you're focused only on that fear and you're doing this out of that fear, then it's not really love. You're just trying to
Yes.
protect yourself. You're looking out for your
Yeah.
best
Well,
interest.
yeah, naturally. Yeah.
So,
That's exactly
yeah.
right. And it takes people a lot of work to break out of that thinking if they've spent a long time in it or if they've
Mhm.
grown up in it. And so
Yeah.
I have people contacting me who have read my books, the Eden series, and it's expanded their universe. Now they think, okay, we live in a populated universe, so
Mhm.
God is something bigger than I'd imagined.
Mhm.
And then they go to the Bible and they realize, okay, so some of these stories are not about God, they're actually about contact with ancient visitors.
Mhm.
But then they'll come back and say, so what does that mean about my salvation? So what must I do to be saved? And how do I avoid hell? And all of a sudden, you've got a bargaining process going on between old belief systems and new information. And
Mhm.
people are very anxious about going back to these questions because they don't want to lose their salvation or risk condemnation. And it can take quite a lot of time to deconstruct these doctrines that have been put on people before
Yeah.
people are really free to start exploring and saying,
Mhm.
so what is the go then? And
Yeah.
I'm very grateful to have had the time to do that and to have reached a point where exploration for me is something exciting,
Mhm.
where I feel I don't have to get everything absolutely right
Yeah.
in order to avoid a terrible eternity. How
Yeah.
can you learn freely if getting the answer wrong on any point is going to have those kind of consequences?
Mhm.
It's like I was in a school choir years ago, and I joined it by accident. I thought I was joining the orchestra, and I signed the wrong form. Found myself in a school choir,
Mm.
and we had a great choir master who would always pick up if you were sort of lip syncing because you didn't know the part. And he'd
Oh.
say, no, 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 no. I want you to make your mistakes with confidence
Mm.
because then I'll hear it and then we can correct it.
Yeah.
But I can't teach a boy to sing who won't sing.
Mm.
And it's a bit like that with life. You have to live courageously. You have to be willing to make mistakes. You have to explore and be in a space of saying, well, I'm not quite sure about this, that, and the other. But there's no way you can occupy that space until you've gotten rid of these terrible doctrines of judgment and heaven and hell and go to the
Yeah.
root meanings of the key words. And those doctrines are just not there in the Bible.
Yeah. That's so true. Yeah. Getting past the fear is the hardest part. Getting past that fear. When I looked into fear and how it operates, it actually travels down through epigenetic memories,
Oh,
15 to
yes.
20 generations. Yeah. So a lot of people are already pre-wired to have that fear before they're even given, or taught any of the doctrines or taught any of this fear-based stuff. It's already internally, I guess, brewing inside of them, and just waiting to be triggered. And so we have to realize also that, yeah, there's epigenetics. And when the fear now is being raised up in them from the teachings, the RNA is storing that negative information and being passed down again to the next generation through the RNA. So there's
Yes.
this trend of passing on this low frequency, low vibration thinking when it comes to this. And instead of having the vision or the version of it that we have, which is very freeing and relieving and relaxing and calming, versus a lot of people are out there really struggling with a lot of fear. And fear can actually reduce your lifespan. It can actually put you in dis-ease, which will give you a disease, and then you'll be pushing up daisies.
Well, yes, that's right.
Yeah.
Epigenetics is fascinating, and there's some really solid science around it, showing that an animal will respond to a trigger on the basis of its ancestors' experience of that trigger.
Mhm.
And so there's plenty of objective data proving that that is the case, that we do. And very often what transfers the most easily, it's those triggers that go to the most primitive part of our brain, to the fear response, the
Yes.
flight, fight, fright engine right in the middle of our brains. So it's a powerful force, epigenetics. So I'll tell you the story of how I first discovered epigenetics. And it was through a pharmacist. And I had gone to see the pharmacist for some medication or other. It's probably antihistamine. And while he was getting something together, it was not my usual pharmacist. And I noticed that he was very, very slim. And so I said, if you don't mind my asking, what is your secret to staying so slim? Because in midlife, it's an interest of mine, if you know what I mean. And so he said, it's a very interesting story, I'll tell you. And I thought, oh, gosh, there's more of an answer than I was expecting. He said, my family were traditionally not slim people. Our family, traditionally, going back through the generations, were very heavy set people. And then my great-grandfather was in a concentration camp in the Second World War. And when he emerged from that camp, he was rake thin. And then he got married and he had a family, and his kids were rake thin.
Wow.
And their kids were rake thin. And now I am rake thin. Wow. Because my great-grandfather's body had to learn how to live rake thin and how even to thrive rake thin. And that lesson has been passed on through the genes. So even without that that trigger mechanism that we were talking about, where we instinctively know what to be frightened of because of what our ancestors experienced, there's something even deeper that's happened here that's actually programming what shape you're going to be and what health is going to look like for you. And so that was my introduction. That was my object lesson in epigenetics, that things can happen in our lives that we would consider to be experiences, but the learning from the experience will go from our generation to the next, to the next, to the next. So I find epigenetics absolutely fascinating and well worth a good read.
Yeah, definitely. So shout out to Dr. Bruce Lipton, who pioneered epigenetics about 25 years ago. And the scientific community almost ostracized him and scoffed at him. But he stuck to his ground, and he stood his ground, and he's been proven right. So he's been completely venerated because now it's taught in mainstream universities all over the world.
That's right. And even in pharmacies.
Yes, exactly. Even in pharmacies, that was an incredible story. I know we had talked a little bit, about doing this this Bible study and to come up with an idea or to speak on what our perception of Jesus actually is, right? What does Jesus mean to us, and who is Jesus to us, and who do we think Jesus was, and so forth. So let's go into that. Let's move into that topic now.
Yeah. And I think it's good to talk about this because very often you and I will be interviewed or will be recording a documentary or a video, and people will hear us responding to what we would consider to be distortions. We'll respond to narratives that we feel have been negative and destructive. And so I think sometimes people read into that, okay, Paul's clearly anti-Jesus. He's clearly lost his faith. And they'll say similar things about you. Billy's obviously an anti-Jesus person. But for myself, my view of Jesus has simply evolved. And I often tell people who give me a bit of pushback, let me just start by saying I have been a follower of Jesus for 43 years, and I would still consider myself a follower of Jesus's teachings. It's just that my understanding of Jesus has evolved. I no longer see Jesus through the lens of a lot of the dogma and doctrines that I lived with for decades. I, for instance, was saying earlier that the doctrine of hell, I believe, is ill-founded. And once you've dismantled that, then your understanding of Jesus as a savior completely changes, because he's no longer saving you from an angry God. He's waiting to consign you to hell for eternity. So if he's not doing that, then what is he doing? And if that wasn't what the cross was about, then what are those stories about?
Mm-hmm.
So I believe my story of Jesus has expanded, has enriched. I have always, all through my life as an evangelical, charismatic Christian, I've always looked to Jesus as a model, as an example, as someone showing me what's possible. But when I get into the history of how we have looked at Jesus, I find it very interesting. Again, in the beginning, there were a kaleidoscope of views about Jesus and a whole spectrum of ways of seeing and talking about Jesus. And the early controversies in Christianity were all around, so was he divine and how do we express that? And so when you get into the councils and the production of the creeds, that's what they're talking about. And so in the Nicene Creed, for instance, which came together through a council in 325 AD, it says this. I've just got the section about Jesus here. We believe in one Lord, Jesus Christ. Christ means the chosen one, the special one, the anointed one. We believe in one Lord, Jesus Christ, the only Son of God, eternally begotten of the Father, God from God, light from light, true God from true God, begotten, not made, of one being with the Father. Through him all things were made. So we've got all those lines. That's 8 lines, really emphasizing we see Jesus as divine. Not just the chosen one, not just the Messiah, but divine. And then it says, for us and for our salvation, he came down from heaven. By the power of the Holy Spirit, he became incarnate from the Virgin Mary and was made man. And that last phrase, and was made man, is all they've got on the human side of the equation. Now, this is unfortunate because, of course, the Gospels introduce Jesus to us as a human being, as a man who did and said these things. And bit by bit, the reader of the Gospels thinks, oh, this is interesting. There's something a bit more to him here. And we work out, oh, he is the chosen one. That's what these Gospels are really about. But where does that go? When we get into later Christianity, we've codified what that divinity means, that Jesus is now of one being with the Father. He's got the same authority as the Father. He's God, God from God, etc. And he becomes this impossibly removed figure who we can only relate to by venerating and worshiping him.
Right.
But that's a little distance from the Gospels, where Jesus is saying, now that you've seen me do these things, do the same. Or when he says, anyone who believes in me will do the kind of things I've been doing, these and even greater things will he do. So Jesus in the Gospels is sort of shoulder to shoulder with us. And what didn't happen so much in the creeds and councils was to talk about his humanity and to what extent is he the same as us? To what extent is he different? Because my view today is Jesus was definitely a human being. I believe he was a historic figure, and I've made the case for that in other places. I think the way the Roman Empire distorted the Jesus story proves there was an original, authentic Jesus story that was inconvenient. So I'm very comfortable with Jesus, the human being. It's how he's introduced to us. I'm comfortable with saying he's divine, but the question is he divine in the same way that you are, Billy, in the same way that I am, or in a different way? And there are other portions of scripture that emphasize Jesus's sameness to us, not his difference. So if I go to Hebrews 2 and 4, I've got these verses. Hebrews 2 says, but the one who makes people holy and those who are made holy are of the same family. It actually says of the same stock, made of the same stuff, has the same DNA, to use modern language. And for that reason, Jesus is not ashamed to call us brothers and sisters. Since children have flesh and blood, he too shared in our humanity. So those verses are emphasizing he's the same as us. And it goes on to say, for this reason, he had to be made like us, like them, it says, fully human in every way, says the text, in order that he might become a merciful and faithful high priest in service to God, and that he might make atonement for the sins of the people. That's their interpretation. For we do not have a high priest who's unable to empathize with our weakness, but we have one who's been tempted in every way just as we are. And so those verses are emphasizing he's the same as us. He's made of the same stuff. And that's why he can be a model. That's why Jesus can say, now you've seen me do these things, do the same. Anyone who believes in me will do the same kind of things I've been doing. These and even greater things will he do. So I have no problem with seeing Jesus as divine, but I think he's showing us what divine humanity looks like, because he's human in exactly the same way as us. And I think he's pointing to what Paul said in that quote I mentioned before, that we are all emanations of the source. We're all expressions of cosmic consciousness. We're all expressions of cosmic intelligence. And so my view of Jesus now is one where I identify with him far more closely. And I see him not as an object to be worshipped. I mean, after all, he said, I did not come to be served, but rather someone to learn from, someone who's trying to help me with how I live this life, and someone to emulate. And that's my take on Jesus.
Yeah. Now that's amazing, because it really aligns with a lot of what I believe. You know, I believe that Jesus was a template, basically, a template for us to live. So we find that there are other similar stories about Jesus in the ancient past. So through the ancient lens, when I look into it, I realized there were stories of Christ or Christos that had appeared that had very similar stories. If you look into Egypt, you have Osiris, right? Killed, dismembered, resurrected, became the ruler of the afterlife. His death and resurrection were celebrated yearly. We have Attis in Anatolia, born a virgin from Nana, died and was resurrected. His death and rebirth were celebrated in spring rites, coinciding with Easter. Then you have the Buddhist version, born a virgin in some traditions, performed miracles, taught compassion, detachment, and enlightenment. And so there's, you know, the Zoroaster, the Quetzalcoatl. I mean, I can just keep going. There are these ancient accounts of a figure arising and showing up and having extremely similar stories to the Jesus that we know in the biblical text. It doesn't take anything away from him. It just shows me that maybe, just maybe, this has happened many times to help bring mankind back to our true selves, to make us remember who we truly are, to bring us back to our divinity, to realign us with the universe and God and everything else, and to let us know, like, hey, you're slipping, you're backsliding, you have to get back on track. So this template, if you follow it, you can bring mankind back to a golden age. When I research the places, you know, so that's what I feel, you know, about Jesus in terms of that. You want to say something?
Yeah, I think it's very interesting you make that point, Billy, because I think what's different in the way Christianity formed was how, as Christianity became the imperial department of religion, and by 381, you really had to be a Christian to be a good citizen in the Roman Empire. The stories about Jesus were treated differently. They were all about his uniqueness and why this is the religion you must follow and no other. Yeah. And it meant that people went back to the stories of, for instance, Jesus's virgin birth and started treating it differently to how they treated all the other virgin birth stories that were out there, because Greco-Roman literature was full of virgin births. I mean, an example would be Alexander the Great, whose mother was human and whose father was a god. That's a trope in ancient story. It's a way of explaining why the hero is a hero, why the great emperor was a great emperor. This story of human mum, divine dad, and now we've got the amazing Alexander. You could see that as a template for the Jesus story, but you don't see people in the Alexandrian Empire going back and treating that story as if it's science or if it's sort of journalistic entries about what happened, that is just the story. That's the mythos around the great figure. Whereas in Christianity, believers started going back and treating that same kind of story as if, yeah, but this one's real. This one's history.
Yeah.
You know, all the other stories of human mothers, divine fathers are clearly just myths and pagan stories, but ours is true. Mm-hmm. And that then, I think, distorts how we read all these stories. And I think through that process of turning Christianity into an exclusive claim that you have to be a Christian, you have to follow this religion, it then distorts a lot of these stories. And I think that's what's pushed us into a place where we're very uncomfortable with even using the word story around something like the virgin birth or the crucifixion or the ascension. Mm-hmm. Whereas if we come at these stories through the lens of Greco-Roman story, because that's the context in which they were written, we will recognize these as tropes. Mm-hmm. We will recognize the virgin birth story and say, oh, I know what the author's saying here. We'll recognize the story of the empty tomb at the end of Mark and say, oh, I know what he's saying here. Jesus is now to be found among the gods. Mm-hmm. And so I think we went down a bit of a false path in trying to nail down all the precise language and mathematics and science of incarnation and soteriology and how do we define exactly how he was divine, instead of saying these are the stories around Jesus that tell us to take him seriously. Mm-hmm. And I think we've pushed ourselves into a corner where if we don't take that very fundamentalist view, there's the notion you're somehow dishonoring the scriptures. Whereas I feel if you read it through the Greco-Roman lens, recognize the tropes, see it as part of a family of very similar stories, I think that's the only way you're going to get out of the texts what the writers put in.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. Because when you go from that perspective, I feel like you can actually make some real progress with humanity. You know, the other way is still based on this. It's still kind of really based on fear. It's really based on fear, and it's based on an ideology. But the other way, it gives everyone hope and the ability to feel like they can contribute to civilization and society and be a good person and be a great person and contribute and do greater things and help change the world, to actually manifest heaven on earth, which I believe is the real test. Not to wait to die so that you can live. The test is, can you get this right here? And let's see if y'all could come together and fix this and make it a heaven right now. And if you can't, then maybe you guys get another chance. But I think that's what it's really all about. And this notion that, you know, if you don't repent and call on the name of Jesus, then you can't make it into heaven, and you're going to be damned into hell for the rest of your life or all eternity. To me, just is illogical, because if I'm a person that's a great human being that has never seen or heard anything about this Jesus, and I'm just helping people in my tribe, so to speak, and I'm taking care of the family in the city, the civilization, and I'm hunting and protecting, and I'm giving back to nature and praising nature and saying, you know, thank you for giving me this, our family, this food today, and being worthy of being a great captain or leader or chief. And then somebody halfway around the world can actually be a rapist or a serial killer or a crook, and they can do this their entire life. If they say, call on the name of Jesus and repent right at the very last second before their heart stops, they can go to heaven. But the person that's been a great human being for their society their entire life is not going to get in. Something doesn't add up there. It just doesn't make any sense. And I think that that's real ideology and dogma versus looking at it from a perspective as we are all God walking in the flesh. We're an emanation of God walking in the flesh. Jesus came to those who have the blessing to hear the word and to see the teachings and to understand and discern them, is to say, yes, that's a template. I'm going to follow that. If my life is over here and it's incorrect, I want to move and shift into this frequency and vibration so that I can be a blessing to others and a blessing to the world and help heal people and bring this world to the next level. And I think when we take that mindset, we can really see real, true change on the planet versus a bunch of people kind of sitting back, kicking their feet up, watching the world burn, saying, hey, I got my go to heaven card. I'm okay. So I'm just waiting to get swept off of my feet into this magical heaven while everyone else is, out here doing whatever they do. I think it just puts us back into a situation, or puts a person in a situation where they don't take accountability for their own actions. They're always saying, well, I have an out card. I just got to call on the name of Jesus and I'll be good to go. So,
yes,
and I don't think that's fair. Yeah.
No, and I think a lot of those beliefs they're really built on the doctrines of the church rather than built on what Jesus actually taught and modeled. There's a moment I really love in the Gospels where the sons of thunder, James and John, two of Jesus's apostles, come to him, and they've been out on their missionary tour, and they say to Jesus, oh, we found someone else, someone we didn't know, not one of us, who was out there healing people and doing entity removal. And because he wasn't one of us, we stopped him. And Jesus says, what on earth did you do that for? And so clearly he says, anyone who's not against us is with us. Jesus is not into that kind of tribalism.
Yeah.
Not into it at all. If someone's out there doing good things, why on earth would you stop them? And another saying he has, which speaks to what you were just saying, Billy, and it will segue us into the teaching through fiction section. There's a parable that comes in Matthew's gospel, the parable of the two sons. And I'll just read it to you from Matthew 21. There was a man who had two sons. He went to the first and said, son, go and work today in the vineyard. I will not, he answered. But later he changed his mind and went. Then the father went to another son and said the same thing. He answered, I will, sir. But he did not go. Then Jesus asked, which of the two did what his father wanted? The first, they answered. So it's a very simple story, but it's got very far-reaching implications, because in that story, the father represents God. And the one who actually did the will of the father was the one who said no to him. So we've got a scenario in which the person who said no to God actually ends up doing the work of God and being the one who's doing the right thing. And the one who said yes to God and said all the right things and said all the nice things, all innocent, butter wouldn't melt in his mouth, didn't do anything. And so we've got a picture there that subverts the idea of the tribalism that religion often pushes us into. And what's interesting about that story, first of all, it suggests there are people all around the world who may have said no to God. And as far as Jesus is concerned, that's not a problem. So that's a train of thought worth following.
Yeah.
But now I'm going to ask this question. Were there really two sons, or did Jesus make that up? Well, most Bible readers would say, well, he made it up. It's what we call a parable. Jesus has created a fiction in order to make a point, in order to teach something. And it's one of many, many examples in which we see Jesus using fiction to teach something. And I think that, again, is something worth sitting with for a long time, because once you've processed that, you will begin to read the Gospels and the New Testament differently, and it begins to break us out of this fundamentalist way of going at things. But I want to see where this idea leads us, because teaching through fiction is not exclusive to Christianity. It's there in the Hebrew scriptures, it's there in Greco-Roman culture, it's all around the world. We've always had stories to teach us stuff. I mean, one of the best examples I can think of is the Emperor's New Clothes. Every child learns the story of the Emperor's New Clothes. It teaches something really quite important and quite significant. It teaches that anyone whose wealth or importance depends on a person of power will not critique that person of power. That person of power can be as absurd as anything. But if that person's position depends on them or their wealth or their standing, they won't critique them. They will pretend they're not seeing what they're seeing. Now, this is a perpetually relevant teaching for anyone trying to understand politics around the world in any age, but it's told in a children's story. You've only got to say, case of the Emperor's New Clothes, and immediately we know what's being said. The Emperor's New Clothes is fiction. It is a made-up story, but it tells us something true about the world. So since time immemorial, we've used stories like that to teach stuff. Jesus did the same. He made up those two sons, and he told that story to teach us stuff. Now here's another saying, and I want to show you how our thinking begins to slip, and certainly speaking as a recovering conservative Christian, how my thinking slipped. This is the story of the rich man and Lazarus. It's in Luke 16. Jesus said, there was a rich man who was dressed in purple and fine linen and lived in luxury every day. At his gate was laid a beggar named Lazarus, covered with sores and longing to eat what fell from the rich man's table. Even the dogs came and licked his sores. The time came when the beggar died, and the angels carried him to Abraham's side. The rich man also died and was buried. In Hades, where the rich man was in torment, he looked up and saw Abraham far away with Lazarus by his side. So he called to him, Father Abraham, have pity on me and send Lazarus to dip the tip of his finger in water and cool my tongue, because I'm in agony in this fire. But Abraham replied, Son, remember that in your lifetime you received your good things, while Lazarus received bad things. But now he's comforted here and you're in agony. And besides all this, between us and you, a great chasm has been set in place, so that those who want to go from here to you cannot, nor can anyone cross over from there to us. The rich man answered, Then I beg you, Father, send Lazarus to my family, for I have 5 brothers. Let him warn them, so that they will not also come to this place of torment. Abraham replied, They have Moses and the prophets. Let them listen to them. No, Father Abraham, he said, but if someone from the dead goes to them, they will repent. He said to him, If they do not listen to Moses and the prophets, they will not be convinced, even if someone rises from the dead. So there's a story. Was there really a rich man who had a guy called Lazarus who lived at the end of his driveway? Well, again, most Bible readers would say, no, probably not. I think he's made this story up again to make a point. All right, then. So was there really a tormenting fire from which the dead can shout and ask for special exceptions so someone can go and warn their family? Yes, I think there is a fire. And is there really a gulf that's been set to ensure that that should never happen? Oh, I think so. So all of a sudden it's not fiction anymore. It is fiction, and it's appealing to other fiction, the fiction of the underworld, Hades, the place of fire, the place of the whole thing is a story. And yet we start off saying, yes, this is a story, this is a story. Oh, no, actually, this bit, I think I want to say that's true. And we begin to see that it's actually a little bit arbitrary where we're drawing that line. Why have we slipped into telling the truth? And the answer will be because of beliefs we already hold, because of doctrine that's already been set. So I share that as an example of how the idea can slip around of whether it's okay to say this is fiction. Here's another. Take it to the next level. We'll go to the book of Acts, the story of the ascension. After he said this, so this is Luke writing in Acts. After Jesus said this, he was taken up before their very eyes, and a cloud hid him from their sight. They were looking intently up into the sky as he was going, when suddenly 2 men dressed in white stood beside them. Men of Galilee, they said, why do you stand here looking into the sky? This same Jesus who's been taken from you into heaven will come back in the same way you have seen him go into heaven. Did that really happen?
Mm.
Or is that a story because it's in the same pattern we mentioned earlier of Greco-Roman tropes, which tell that the hero is now vindicated, has now been taken up into the heavens, is now among the gods? Is it not one of those stories? It's a divinization story, isn't it? The hero has received the ultimate vindication. Isn't that what we're looking at? Isn't this fiction? And there are plenty of believers who would say, yes, actually, probably that is a trope. That is a fiction. Great. So the next chapter as well, is that fiction? And again, it begins to slip and people want to say, oh, no, I take that as fact. So I think I'll come to one more example, because I think this is where the rubber really hits the road. The story of Jesus calming the storm in Mark 4. So the writer says this: that day when evening came, Jesus said to his disciples, let us go over to the other side. Leaving the crowd behind, they took him along just as he was in the boat. There were also other boats with him. A furious squall came up, and the waves broke over the boat so that it was nearly swamped. Jesus was in the stern, sleeping on a cushion. The disciples woke him and said to him, Teacher, don't you care if we drown? He got up, rebuked the wind, and said to the waves, Be quiet, be still. And the wind died down, and it was completely calm. He said to his disciples, Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith? They were terrified and asked each other, Who is this? Even the wind and the waves obey him. And there's an overlapping story in which Jesus walks over the waters to them in the boat, of course. So again, did this really happen? We've accepted that Jesus makes up stories and teaches through fiction. We've accepted that maybe Luke, writing the book of Acts, has done the same. He's teaching through fiction. What about the writer of Mark? Is he teaching through fiction? Where do we draw the line and say, oh, I don't accept teaching through fiction at this point? And especially if we're finding the gospel writers using tropes, isn't the fact that we recognize this from Osiris, or we recognize this from Alexander the Great, or from Asclepius or Dionysus, isn't the fact we recognize it a trope, a clue that we're being taught something through fiction? And if we don't recognize it as a trope, we won't know what the point is that's being made. And so I think once you realize teaching through fiction has a great pedigree, Jesus did it, Luke does it in Acts, and possibly the gospel writers do it too, because why wouldn't the followers of Jesus teach in the same way that he taught?
Exactly.
How is it all right for Jesus to do it, but not all right for his followers to do it? And I think once you've realized, oh, that's the space we're in, then I think we can go back and look at things in a way that isn't a fundamentalist view, that is going to say, so what is the point of the story? What is the moral of the story? What is the takeaway? And I think all these stories are there in that kind of a way, rather than here's the history, here's the journalism, here's the science.
Right. No, absolutely. I mean, even in the case, like you say, Luke, I mean, he taught through the same exact system. He mimicked and copied Jesus's version or teaching technique, right, through these same stories. Even with the prodigal son, you know, it's a fiction. It's not a true story, but it can be represented or thought of as a true story. It's been preached directly as an actual true story, but it's designed to teach a lesson. It's a story to teach a lesson. If you take it, you know, that kind of story, if you take it as fact or fiction, it doesn't really matter, you know, but because it's not really dogma, it's a really good teaching lesson. But it gives you things. There's several things that you get out of this. You get engagement of the imagination, number one. So the storytelling, the reason why it was so powerful to do this, to do these parables and so forth and teach that way, because, well, there wasn't an internet. There wasn't tablets and satellites and, you know, all this entertainment. And so people really did gather around and listen to stories. And if you were a great storyteller, you can capture the air and the mind of someone in those times. And so you get this engagement because it's like they're really tapping into the mental. And then you get the emotional resonance by telling these stories. And so you can see, like with Job, it really it teaches somebody about the consequences of a situation. What can happen to you if you go this way or that way, right? And if you come back and you can get back on good terms, you can be reconciled. And then also, I think, cultural adaptability is another key factor in the reason why they utilize this technique to teach. And so fictional forms, it says, can be retold, dramatized, and appropriated across different contexts. So they really had mastered this whole technique of utilizing this teaching style, which Jesus was a master at, and they copied it from Jesus. And it really did a phenomenal job in capturing the mind, and to get the people to listen deeply to every single word, and to then visualize it in their mind, and then to get the point that was trying to be made, the lesson that was needing to be taught. It was really a very, very great way. It still is a very great way of teaching. And they definitely utilized, of course, fictional stories a lot of the times to get these points across and teach people things that they had never even thought about or perceived in the past. And now they're like, oh, wow, my mind has been opened. My eyes have been opened. Now I have this new information. I have another perspective on reality or on this type of situation. So in a way, that just that recognition or that discernment of the story means they were kind of born again in the conscious plane. Now they can look back on their previous self who didn't really understand that concept before and see that they're now risen a little bit higher. This is how you become an ascended master. You gradually grow in consciousness and spirituality and knowledge and wisdom and understanding. And before you know it, you look back on your previous selves and you can see all the levels you've made it to. It's really a great way of teaching.
Yes. And I think it's important to apply that even to the stories about Jesus, because a lot of believers are very comfortable with everything you just said in every context other than that one. So they're happy to find poetry over here, an analogy over here, an analogy in this biblical story, a metaphor in this biblical story. But then when they come to the stories about Jesus, it's, no, we're back locked into this is history, this is science.
Yeah.
But I actually think, no, we need to do our interpretation in all these places. And the richest place to do our interpretation is the stories about Jesus.
Yeah, absolutely. A recent post I had just made the other day on social media, it was a parable, or not a parable, really like a quote, really is what it was. And it was saying that the kingdom of heaven is within us, or within you. And that is actually very ancient. It goes all the way back to the Egyptian Book of the Dead.
Yes.
And I posted that. It actually did very well. I got very little negativity out of it, but I posted some information as I summarized a little bit of what the ancient Egyptians were talking about. The ancient Egyptians believed that the human soul, or the Ba, Ka, and Ankh, were a divine spark from Ra or Atum, and thus each person was a vessel for divinity. Several passages reference the idea that the soul is eternal and already in harmony with the gods, indicating that divinity is already present within. And so the kingdom of heaven is within you, and whosoever shall know himself shall find it. And so this is an ancient concept, and we see a lot of this ancient information. It makes it into the mouths of the people speaking within the Gospels. Why do you think that is? Yes, it does.
Well, it's fascinating. You're absolutely right. It's there in Egyptian wisdom. It's there in Buddhism as well. And now we find it in the Gospels, the canonical and extra canonical. So it's in the Gospel of Luke, the kingdom of heaven is within you. And it's in the Gospel of Thomas, the kingdom of heaven is within you. And I like to go to the root meanings of those words and realize that kingdom can equally be translated as realm, and heaven, well, that's the skies, that's space, that's the cosmos. We're talking about the whole cosmic realm.
Yeah.
Now it becomes an even more enormous saying in the Gospels, the whole cosmic realm is within you. And then there's another similar saying in Matthew's Gospel, Matthew 4:17, I think it is, summarizes the message that Jesus toured with in his first year of ministry, where he says, metanoiete, go beyond the mind, because the realm of the cosmos is at hand, has come close. You can reach out and take hold of it. And so these are interesting sayings, because apparently the realm of the cosmos is something we can engage, we can play with, we can learn the principles of it and start doing things with them. Yeah. And then that idea that if we look inside ourselves, we'll find the whole cosmos. And if we peer deep into the cosmos, we find ourselves. This is where the Christian tradition and the Hermetic tradition completely overlap. And in fact, as Hermeticism developed at the beginning of the Common Era, it's very difficult to see which is the real engine room, whether Christianity is informing Hermeticism or if it's the other way around. It would be, I think, simply, the air that was breathed at that time. These were the things that people were hearing and thinking, and probably they were on their own learning journeys as to what it meant. But fundamentally, it's a call to explore.
Yeah, absolutely.
Explore what's possible.
Yeah, and really even science now backs it up. If you want to look at mainstream, astrophysics, where a star, expands into a red giant, then shrinks down. But those stars don't go into a supernova. But the stars that are supermassive and actually explode in supernovae, that happens. The interior of those stars are fused into heavier elements and then spewed out throughout the universe. And then they end up in these gas clouds that then recoalesce and create accretion disks and then create brand new solar systems, which create planets and moons and so forth. And the next thing you know, we pop up. And then when we analyze the elements inside of our body, we realize that they're heavier elements made from exploded stars. So we literally are stardust. Yes. So the universe is within us.
Stuff. Yeah. Yes, that's right. That's a beautiful way to see it. That's exactly right. So it is true in a very nuts and bolts kind of way. Also in a very mind-bending way when we get into the quantum realm. And what we're learning is that when we look at the very, very tiny, we are learning about the cosmos and how the cosmos works. And again, that's unpacking a Hermetic idea that if you study the very small, you'll understand the very large. If you go within, you'll understand the universe. And it's now being backed up by empirical research and experiments. So it's not just ideas. This is something very profound about the nature of reality.
Yeah, no, it's so cool and incredible. I mean, some people tend to feel like they're just a small speck of, worthless nothing. But I feel like the more I learn about this, the more I feel connected to everything, the more I feel that I'm part of everything. And it just makes me feel grand. It makes me feel like I have a true purpose. And it makes me, I get excited because there's so much wonder and information that's available to learn and to research. It's never ending, and for me, doing that for me is like I made my life. This is it for me. And just researching, digging into information, trying to gain, higher perspectives on information, changing previous understandings and learning from new data and just learning more really about myself, which has helped me learn more about the universe as a whole and everyone within it and everything within it. It's just a great experience, just to be here at this time to be able to do this, because there have been times on this planet where we didn't have access to research like this and to ponder like this and to try to discern like this, because you were just trying to survive the night, like the
Neolithic. For sure.
Yeah. So,
and then there were times where you'd be punished for saying things like this, put under house arrest or like Giordano Bruno burnt at the stake for saying these kinds of things. So very true. I think I am very excited I'm alive now. When we actually have the freedom to explore these things and share these thoughts publicly.
Absolutely. Yeah, this has been beautiful. Is there anything else you wanted to get into?
Well, I think we should just note that our great mutual friend, Eric von Daniken, has turned 90. Yes. I know that he's a significant person in both our journeys. Certainly for me, I discovered Eric von Daniken when I was 11 years old, where my mum and dad introduced me to his work.
Yeah.
And he changed my life because he got me asking the big questions. He helped me to see that there was a gap in our ability to explain ourselves as an intelligent technological species. He suggested the idea we might understand ourselves better if we allow for the possibility there were external interventions. So all these thoughts were sown into my mind when I was 11 years old. But it's only much later, when I came back to his work, that I was able to see where he started, because his journey into paleo contact was very similar to mine, that it began in the world of theology and Bible translation. And for Eric, it was when he was still at high school in Switzerland, and he went to a Jesuit school where they were very strong on teaching languages. And part of the language exercises at that school was to translate passages of scripture from one language to another. And it was as he did that that he began thinking, wait a minute, when I look at what these words actually mean, some of these don't look like stories of a god. They look like stories of ancient ET contact. And that was the beginning of his thought process that led to Chariots of the Gods and the 49 books that he's written through his lifetime. So I feel a great sense of he's always been my Uncle Eric, really. He's been that important to my journey. I relate to his route into the topic as well. And we've got two names in common as well. Paul, Anton are his middle names. So I've always, all through my life, had an eye on Eric. But latterly, as I've come back to his work, I've realized he really got some major points right in a spectacular way, because he was ahead of the curve. He really was the person who made conversation about previous civilizations and the possibility of ET contact in the deep past. He made that the stuff of public conversation in a way that really nobody had done before. And so I really want to honor him for that.
Oh, absolutely. For me, Eric von Daniken is just an incredible giant. I came across his work first in the 1990s. So a lot later than you, but in the 90s, I came across his work. I came across Chariots of the Gods. It was actually made into like a show or a like a documentary, basically.
Yeah, he did a movie.
Yeah, movie. Right, correct. That's what I saw. And I was like, wow, these are some great questions, because everything within that movie was a question, right? They never made a hard statement, but they asked questions, and those questions made me think. And I was like, this is incredible, because some of the stuff that I'm hearing is aligning with some of my own personal beliefs or understandings. And then I found out there was a book behind this. And I went and got the book, and I was able to find an original 1968 copy of Chariots of the Gods, one of the very first ones that ever came out. And I put it in a plastic sheath and kept it all those years. I finally had a chance to meet Eric von Daniken several times, but I didn't have the book on me. But the time that I met him in Blackpool in the UK, I made sure I had that with me, and he signed it for me live on stage. And so I really cherished that book. We were honoring him there because he had sold, now at that time, 80 million copies of Chariots of the Gods worldwide. 80 million.
Wow.
What an influence. That's just like, right? It had been translated into every language on the planet pretty much. And just being able to sit with him and talk with him and ask him questions about his travels and his experiences. I've had the pleasure of being able to actually interview him several times, not only on my own podcast, but even for TV shows and for stage shows. And then more recently, I invited him to be a guest, an expert on my TV series, Anunnaki Ancient Secrets Revealed. So he appears in, I believe, episodes 6 and 7. And he was, man, a pleasure to work with once again. And in that episode, the final episode, he literally lights a torch and hands the torch to me. So, wow.
He is so gracious, I think, towards the generations since who, I mean, we're able to do our work in part because of the trail that he blazed. And he's so gracious about it. I was very fortunate. He endorsed my book, The Scars of Eden. He wrote the foreword to my first book in German, Flucht aus Eden. And I think he's been so encouraging to our generation. He's not been someone who has been proprietorial and said, hey, this is my topic, clear off, and been critical of everybody else. He's totally the opposite. He is so encouraging and so affirming. And for him, what matters is getting these ideas out there, is promoting this conversation of a topic that might otherwise be taboo. And I take my hat off him because he's taken a lot of flack through the years for doing that. And the thing, I think that one of the most important things Eric has taught me, and I've been very fortunate to be interviewed by him for his channel, and then we interviewed him for The Fifth Kind. And the thing that he said to me that has really impacted me is to understand the role of the writer, that the role of the writer and the tenured academic are two quite different things. So from time to time, you or I probably both have people saying, you don't have enough degrees to be saying these things. And I'm always very diligent to quote the people with degrees in my books. But Eric says it's not your role to have the degrees. It's not your role to have all the PhDs. It's your role to know what the PhDs are saying, and then to be able to connect the dots and say, wait a minute, you said this, this, and this. Doesn't that mean this?
Yes.
You're going to push the conversation forward. You'll take flack for it. But the academics can then come to the table. They can then say, oh, what's this crazy Billy Carson said now? Or what's this crazy Paul Wallis said now? And look at it and say, well, he may have a point here. He may be mistaken here, but he may have a point here. And in that way, the conversation gets moved forward. But unless you're willing to be the writer, to stick his neck out and go further than has been gone before and pioneer the new view, that's not going to happen. But you, the writer, have to do that, and then the academics will come to the table and begin to play ball. And I have really taken that from him. I can see that's exactly what Eric has done. And through the years, he has been entrusted with a lot of privileged information from academics who back Eric von Daniken's views, but they won't do it in public.
Yeah, I know.
Because they don't want to damage their reputation. And I said, Eric, doesn't that drive you mad? And he says, no, it doesn't. Because if I broke the trust and if I blew their cover, I wouldn't get the information that they're giving me. But the information I'm getting is so valuable and shows me I'm on the right track. So they are giving me something when they do that. And I don't resent it if they say, just don't quote me.
Right. Man, you're right about everything. Just an incredible individual. One of the things that impressed me the most, coming from the era that he comes from and the country that he comes from, he displays zero racism. He sees me as a brother. He sees me as a friend. He doesn't see me as a black guy talking paleo contact or aliens or Anunnaki. He sees me as an actual brother. He sees me as also a peer in this field. And I respect him for that.
Yeah, he's a very gracious guy, and I like to celebrate him at every opportunity, but certainly as he's just turned 90. And I note, by the way, that His Late Holiness, the Pope Francis, who has also just passed away, I'm not a follower of popes or a fan of popes, but I happen to think he was a good one. And he honored Eric von Daniken too. When Eric turned 85, Pope Francis sent Eric a beautiful, it was like this huge item with the papal seal on it and beautiful calligraphy, expressing his thanks to Eric for Eric's contribution to society. So when people want to be sniffy about Eric von Daniken, I say, if the Pope can honor him, I think you can.
Yes.
Who am I to disagree?
Right. Exactly. Wow, this was an amazing Bible study. I mean, we can talk for hours. We'll have to do another episode again.
sure.
Again, Paul, your teaching style is just mesmerizing and incredible. Thank you for coming on again. I really, really appreciate it.
Oh, it's been a pleasure, and I will look forward to the next time.
All right, man. Thank you.
All the best.
All right, everyone.
Bye.
That's it.
I knew a man from Golgotha. He was a giving man, a giving man. He promised he would break my every day. In every way I use the word. The wall, the water, and the world. And I'm curious who I'll meet next. Who among them I will love best. That depends upon the context.